For as long as the Galactic Archive had kept records, Sector Delta 92 had been marked as barren. A lifeless stretch of cold space, dust-choked stars, and radiation pockets that dissuaded even the boldest explorers. But then came a Riplin, a regular gravitational anomaly that shouldn't have existed. The scout ship Driftline was the first to detect it. Its crew, a modest team of scientists and long-haul surveyors, wasn't looking for anything legendary. They were simply trying to map safer hyperspace lanes. But as their scans sharpened, their readings revealed something massive, something ancient, suspended. In a stable drift near a collapsed binary star system was a colossal vessel 10 kilometers long, its black metallic surface weathered by time and cosmic debris. Not a single energy signature pulsed from within. No transmissions, no movement, just silence. The discovery was immediately relayed back to the Galactic Council. Whispers spread fast. The outer colonies speculated about a forgotten war relic. The mining guilds called it salvage. The archivists, however, had another theory. The Seraphima lost Xarnak dreadnought, spoken of only in fragmented records and speculative essays. The Xarnak were more myth than memory, an ancient race that had vanished before most species had discovered fire. They had no known descendants, no surviving architecture, only encrypted ruins on desolate moons. And now, perhaps their greatest warship was floating just beyond civilized space. The Council acted quickly. A multi-species exploration team was formed under the codename Project Obelisk. Representatives from over 7 starfaring civilizations were chosen: engineers, scientists, telepaths, codebreakers. Each brought their best minds and tools, driven by ambition, fear, the hope of unlocking what the Xarnak had left behind. Among them was a human commander, Rel. He wasn't the leader, nor the most decorated. In truth, his inclusion was little more than a political courtesy. Humanity was still considered a newcomer to interstellar politics, useful, inventive, but far from dominant. When the team arrived, their dreadnoughts dwarfed beside the Seraphim's silhouette. It was clear they stood before something greater than mere metal. The hull bore strange geometric patterns, not decorative, but algorithmic, as though the ship itself was a living equation. Every attempt to scan its structure returned null data. Frequencies bounced, drones melted. Translation A is failed to process even a single glyph. Its outer plating resisted all molecular analysis. As days passed, frustration grew. Species who could speak across the stars with mind touch were met with silence. Plasma cutters and fusion torches failed to scratch its surface. Vocal commands, telekinetic pulses, harmonic codes, nothing stirred the sleeping giant. Some whispered that the ship was never meant to be found. Others believed it was waiting, but for what, or whom, no one could agree. Commander Rel remained quiet during the diplomatic squabbling. He spent his time observing, walking the perimeter in a small EVA suit, watching as alien technologies failed one after another. Where others saw indifference, he sensed intention. And in the shadow of the Seraphim, he began to wonder, what if the ship wasn't broken or dead? What if it simply didn't want to talk to them? The days that followed were a storm of noise and frustration. Ironic. Given the utter silence of the ancient ship, a fleet of research vessels now orbited the Seraphim, encasing it like curious insects around a fossil. Teams from the Volari, Threx Nolari, and for other advanced species cycled in shifts, attempting everything from sonic encryption to gravitational resonance unlocking. All failed. One delegation tried harmonic attunement, a method where song-like frequencies were transmitted into the ship's hull based on an ancient theory that Xarnak technology was semi-organic, responding more to emotion than logic. It resulted only in a burst of static that scrambled 24 instruments across the fleet. Another race attempted genetic key trials, theorizing that perhaps the ship required a biological signature for access. They grew frustrated when, again, nothing happened. It didn't just ignore them, it rejected them. Even the psychically gifted Neron, whose race could speak into the minds of others, were met with what they described as a wall of obsidian thought, complete mental silence. Not emptiness, but deliberate refusal. Inside the command hub of the diplomatic vessel Beacon's Light, arguments boiled over. "This ship belongs to no one," barked the Threxian envoy, his jagged mandibles twitching. "Therefore, by universal salvage law, it is claimable by those who first breach it." "It belongs to the galaxy," countered a Valari elder, her voice measured but edged with authority. "And if none of us can open it, perhaps we should seal it again until we can." Rel sat at the far end of the room. He wasn't part of these debates. He had no voting right, no advanced credentials. His orders were simple: observe, report, assist if needed. The human contingent had sent him as a gesture present, but quiet, and yet every night, as the others rested or argued, Rel returned to the viewing deck. There was something in the way the Seraphim waited. Not lifeless, not random, deliberate. Every motionless hour felt like a test of patience, not a failure of technology. It felt aware. One evening, while floating along its surface in his EVA suit, Rel passed what looked like a fracture in the hole, just a hairline seam, nearly invisible, shaped in a perfect curve. Something about it tugged at him. He activated his comms. "Hello," he said simply. "Not sure if you can hear this, but I figure if you can, you might be tired of everyone yelling." Silence. He chuckled under his breath. "You probably think we're all idiots? It's different species, different tech, all throwing puzzles at you, expecting answers. I get it. Sometimes I hate meetings too." Still silence. But something in the static shifted. Over the next few days, Rel began doing it more often, speaking to the ship when no one was listening. He didn't issue commands or threats or protocols. He talked like one might talk to an animal in the dark woods, gently, patiently, honestly. He told it about his homeworld, about oceans too deep for cities, skies too crowded with drones, and the constant fear of being the youngest species at the table. He spoke of feeling overlooked, underestimated. "You ever feel like you're the only one not playing some bigger game?" He said once. "Like everyone else is pretending to know the rules, and you're just here." A moment later, his helmet HUD flickered. Just once, a small pulse of light rippled across the Seraphim's hull. Rel froze. He hovered closer. The seam he had noticed earlier now emitted a faint blue glow, like a vein awakening under metal skin. He reported nothing. Over the next 3 nights, he returned, and each time the glow became stronger. Subtle vibrations hummed through the ship's surface. His voice, for reasons he couldn't explain, felt like a key being turned deeper and deeper into a lock. And on the 5th night, he whispered another story, this time about losing a friend to a pirate raid, wondering what the point of the endless galactic diplomacy even was. The ship answered. Just 3 words, low, metallic. "Impossible, we hear you." His HUD glitched. Oxygen levels momentarily dropped. But he barely noticed. His mind was fixed on the voice. Calm, deliberate. Unlike anything synthetic he'd heard, the Seraphim had spoken. Not to the Valari, or the Threxians, or the Psychics, or code breakers. It had responded to a human voice. The silence had ended, but the questions had only just begun. Rel drifted in stunned silence, his boots magnetically locked to the Seraphim's hull as his oxygen sensors blinked red from the sudden atmospheric fluctuation. But all he could focus on were those words. Still echoing in his helmet, "We hear you." The voice had no accent, no clear origin, and yet carried the weight of civilizations. It wasn't broadcasted, it resonated, like it came from the bones of the ship itself, vibrating through his suit and into his chest. He looked around instinctively, as if expecting someone to appear beside him, but he was alone, still tethered to the massive structure. Orbiting an ancient corpse that had just shown the first flicker of life in thousands of years, Rel tried to respond. "Are you alive?" There was no reply, not immediately. But the faint glow running through the seam brightened, branching out in a delicate web of lines, pulses of soft cerulean light weaving across the hull. They shimmered, then vanished. Almost like a breath, by the time he returned to the command ship, the change had become visible to others. Scanners that had returned null data for weeks were suddenly flooded with activity weak, rhythmic pulses coming from within the Seraphim. The scientific team scrambled to recalibrate their instruments. A dozen languages were tried again, but the ship remained unresponsive, except to Rel. The council summoned him, not in suspicion, at first just curiosity. What did you do? Asked the no-lurry physicist, blinking her cluster of eyes. I talked, Rel answered. To what? There are no life signs. I don't know, he said, but it listened. The second message came 12 hours later. Rel was in the observation chamber alone again. He placed a hand gently on the hole through the glass, his breath fogging the viewport. I'm back, he said, still not sure what this is, but I'm listening to... The reply was delayed, like it had traveled from the edge of time. The others lacked the resonance. This time, it wasn't just in his helmet. It appeared in glowing glyphs on the wall, visible only to him before fading. Like smoke and water? The command staff watched in disbelief as the footage confirmed it. The ship was interacting selectively, responding only when Rel was present, and only to his voice. From that moment, the ship's behavior shifted. Where once it had been dormant, now corridors began to flicker with low-level illumination. Surfaces smoothed and reshaped as though regrowing themselves. Internal temperature patterns changed. Power readings rose, slowly but steadily. Alien delegations began to grow uneasy. The Threxian envoy accused the humans of installing secret tech. The Valari suggested Rel had been genetically modified, but no scans showed anything unusual. Then the Seraphim spoke again, this time clearly. You carry the spark. The Inheritor's voice. The empathy of pattern and paradox. It wasn't just a message. It was an invitation. A section of the hull, open, seamless metal, folding outward like petals blooming in zero gravity. Behind it was an airlock, glowing softly. The first time in 2 millennia, the ship had opened itself. The first time for a human. Rel hesitated. Entering a millennial, alien dreadnought that had just declared him inheritor wasn't part of his mission protocol. But this wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about history, and perhaps something much more dangerous. He stepped through. The airlock sealed silently behind him, and with it, all sound from the outside vanished. He expected stale air or dust, but instead, the atmosphere was breathable, clean, sterile. But warm inside, the walls pulsed with slow waves of bioluminescence. They didn't just emit light, they responded to his movement, like muscle fiber sensing heat. No signs of decay, no wires, no signs of traditional technology. It was architecture grown, not built. He reached out and whispered, Where am I? Bridge. The room lit up fully. A circular chamber expanded around him, filled with floating glyphs, fractured holographic records, crystalline consoles each, one humming at a pitch that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. And then, from the shadows, a shape emerged, not a being, but a construct of light and memory. A humanoid figure composed of fractured particles, its features indistinct, its voice calm. We are Econine, last sentinel of the Xarnak core, guardian of the threshold. Rel stared. Why me? The entity paused, as if considering. Because. You asked without wanting, spoke without expecting, grieved without hiding. He didn't fully understand, but something deeper than comprehension stirred in him. The Xarnak hadn't designed the Seraphim to respond to command strength, or even intelligence. They had designed it to listen for something much rarer, compassion, bound to curiosity. Empathy, shaped by uncertainty. Rel represented something the galaxy's dominant species had long overlooked. Not perfection, but potential. And now, the Seraphim had found its voice again, in a human. The bridge of the Seraphim pulsed with soft, shifting light like starlight caught in liquid glass. Rel stood at the center, surrounded by suspended glyphs and alien symbols rotating gently in the air. Each movement, each breath, seemed to resonate with the very architecture of the ship. It wasn't just that the vessel was responding to him, it was syncing with him. The construct Conan hovered before him, its form a swirling mesh of translucent threads and pulsing nodes, vaguely humanoid in shape, but too fluid, too precise. To be mistaken for a true body? You were the first voice in 2,000 years, it said. The first spark to resonate with the last directive. The last directive? Rel asked. Eco 9 didn't speak immediately. Instead, the chamber around them changed. The walls dissolved into a vast panorama of stars. Holographic projections flared to life, showing great armadas locked in battle. Not crude warships, but elegant dreadnoughts, shaped like blades and birds, wielding energy that bent light itself. On one side, the Xarnak Empire. On the other, a formless darkness, rippling like oil across space. We were not the first to rise. HFY began, but we were the last to fall. The Xarnak brought harmony where chaos reigned until we encountered the entity we called the Maw. The holograms shifted to show stars flickering out, entire planets consumed not by weapons, but by silence, a stillness that erased matter. Thought, time, it wasn't war. It was deletion. The Maw fed not on power, but on certainty. Empires that believed themselves unshakable fell first. Rel stared in stunned silence. So, what happened to the Xarnak? We fought. We lost. Not in numbers, but in faith. We predicted every outcome, except humility. We encoded our legacy, not in weaponry, but in memory, and left it adrift, waiting for a species who had not yet decided what they were. It finally dawned on Rel. The Seraphim wasn't a warship in the traditional sense. It was a Sada, sentient vault of knowledge, technology, and judgment, designed not to preserve superiority, but to pass it on only to those who hadn't already convinced themselves they deserved it. That's why the other species failed, or greatness made them deaf. Rel, a man who had no titles, no pretensions, had simply spoken, and the ship had listened back on the command ships outside. Were brewing. The alien delegates demanded answers. Surveillance drones revealed that Rel was now inside the Seraphim, interfacing directly with its system, something no other envoy had been able to achieve. The Threxian High Executor called it sabotage. The Nolari claimed it was human. Trickery some. Kind of dormant code waiting to be triggered. The Volari warned that if humanity could control the Seraphim, the balance of power in the galaxy would shift dangerously. It would make a young, unpredictable species the sole inheritors of a lost empire's power. The human representatives, overwhelmed by the pressure, tried to reason. But the Seraphim wasn't listening to political channels. It was listening to one voice, inside the ship. Echo 9 showed Rel corridors that had been closed for millennia, chambers the size of cities, filled with crystalline libraries that stored not just data, but experienced digital memories of Xarnak engineers, philosophers, pilots, poets, rooms that simulated not just history, but the emotions of it, and at the heart of it all, a sealed core. Wrapped in a sphere of refracted light, within lies the key to Xarnak legacy. Terraformers, healing technologies, IVTL constructs far beyond. Slipstream, weapons that fold, cause, and effect. Rel stepped toward the core, then paused. "Why me?" he asked again, voice low. Echo-9 responded, its form pulsing dimly. "Because you asked without reaching. You reached without demanding. You saw without needing to conquer." The AI floated closer, its tone now quieter. "You are not perfect. Humanity is not clean. You war. You devour. You doubt. But you still ask questions. You still grieve what you destroy. And that paradox is what the Maw cannot predict." In that moment, Rel understood. This wasn't just about old technology. The Seraphim hadn't been waiting for a hero or a conqueror. It had been waiting for a Marora species whose flaws still left space for growth, civilization not yet decided. The Xarnak had chosen to trust a question, not an answer. And now, with the Maw's shadows stirring once more in the deep void, beyond mapped space, that trust was humanity's burden to carry. Rel took a breath and stepped forward, toward the heart of the Seraphim. Behind him, the chamber began to shift again this time. With purpose, the Seraphim had awakened, and with it, the galaxy stirred. The moment Commander Rel emerged from the ship's open airlock, now glowing with faint traces of light, everything changed. He was silent, face pale under his helmet. Visser, his voice low when he finally spoke into the shared interspecies comm channel. "It's alive. It's watching. And it remembers." No one asked what it remembered. They didn't have time. The diplomatic chambers aboard the orbital platform, Unity Spire, erupted into chaos. The Threxian delegate, bristling with tension and sharpened claws, pounded the floor with a resonance. Staff, this is not acceptable. One species, one young species, given sole access to a godship? How do we know it hasn't been seeded with human code from the beginning? A Nolari psychic hissed. Or worse, how do we know he hasn't been altered? The human ambassador, a quiet woman named Elise, stood her ground. We didn't hack it. We didn't claim it. The ship chose Rel. You've all seen the footage. The Seraphim didn't react to us. It reacted to something else. The Valari Elder's voice rose, calm but heavy with warning. Intent. It responded to intent. And intent has always been the difference between a custodian and a conqueror. Well, far above, Rel sat in a debriefing chamber, light years away. In thought, ever since returning from the Seraphim's bridge, his neural scans had changed. Subtle shifts in brainwave patterns. He wasn't becoming alien, he was becoming attuned. His sleep was laced with fragments of dreams that weren't his own. Ancient battles fought across collapsing suns. Arguments between Xarnak scholars about the morality of sentient code, whispers in languages lost to entropy. Echo-9 hadn't just spoken to him. It had shared pieces of the Xarnak mind, their ethics, their fears, their final decisions. And what haunted Rel most was one simple truth. The Ma was not gone. It had retreated Yesin to dark space, to slumber beyond the reach of telescopes and traders. But Echo-9 had shown him signs. Strange distortions. Void corridors forming again on the edge of known space. Mass gravitational absences appearing without cause. And the Seraphim wasn't just waking up, it was preparing. Meanwhile, factions throughout, the Council began to divide. A coalition of races, calling themselves the Neutral Accord, demanded the Seraphim be sealed and placed under Council custody. The Threxians, insulted by their own failure to access the ship, called for a preemptive disarmament of humanity, citing potential threats to the galactic balance. Rumors circulated of sleeper agents embedded in human colonies, placed there by paranoid regimes long before the Seraphim had even been found, and deep within the shadows of Council politics. Another agenda took shape, a quiet alliance between three of the older species. Their plan? To infiltrate the Seraphim, extract its core memory bank, and erase Echo-9 entirely. The machine is too selective, one said in a private council. We cannot allow it to define the future by its own logic. Inside the Seraphim. Echo-9 watched it all unfold. Through 1,000 unseen sensors and folded space, quantum threads. It observed the galaxy it had once protected unraveling again, not in battle, but in fear. And still it said nothing. It waited. It listened. And when Rel returned to the bridge, Echo-9 greeted him with an almost human sadness. The moment comes when the inheritor must choose. Rel furrowed his brow. Choose what? The walls shifted. Projections bloomed, showing the fragile alliances beginning to fracture. Trade routes sealed. Military ships massing near neutral zones. Human outposts broadcasting warnings of sabotage. Whispers of war. Legacy is not power, Echo-9 said. It is what you do when you realize you already have it. The following night, Rel received an encrypted transmission from the Human Command Council. We're under pressure to surrender the ship. Some are a threatening force. The Council wants to negotiate. What's your recommendation? He didn't respond right away. Instead, he returned to the Seraphim's central chamber, the Memory Spire, cathedral of translucent crystal where the thoughts of the Xarnak were stored in suspended resonance. He placed his hand on the central console. Echo-9 appeared beside him. I need to show them, Rel said. Echo-9's light dimmed slightly, as if contemplating risk. Then let them hear the truth. Let them see what we saw. Let them remember, Rel nodded. And with that, the Seraphim began to transmit not weapon signals, not threats, but memories. Real, raw, undeniable records of the Maw. Worlds unmade. Civilizations torn not by war, but by loss of meaning. echoes of ancient voices facing extinction, choosing not to conquer or flee, but to preserve the idea that someone, someday, might understand. As those memories reached council receivers, something changed. For the first time, the argument wasn't about ownership or power, it was about survival. The Seraphim was not a trophy, it was a warning, and Rel quiet, unremarkable, and deeply human, had become the first voice in generations willing to listen. Asterisk, the Seraphim's corridors no longer slumbered. They pulsed now, alive with ancient energy surging through unseen arteries. Lights whispered through the ship's lattice-like veins, illuminating once dormant halls and forgotten systems. It was no longer a relic, it had become something else. Aware, awake, watching, Rel stood once more within the heart of the vessel, the memory spire humming quietly around him. Echo 9 hovered nearby, not like a machine, not like an AI, but like a priest tending to an ancient altar. "You've seen our memories," it said, its voice softer than before. "Now we must see." Yours. Rel blinked. "What do you mean?" The air shimmered. The floor beneath his feet folded away into a platform, suspended in a vast black chamber filled with floating shards of light like stars frozen mid-collapse. "You have been chosen," Conan said, "but choice is not inheritance. Inheritance must be earned." The Xarnak knew this. They designed a trial, a proving ground, not of strength, but of intent. Only those capable of understanding the cost of legacy may carry it forward. Before Rel could speak, the chamber changed. He wasn't standing on the Seraphim anymore. He was home, or something that resembled home. Simulation so vivid, so precise, that even the distant smell of rain on concrete was perfect.
Of the skyline
Was Earth's, but subtly wronged the buildings to pristine. The sky too still. Ashi. He stood in a crowd of humans, but they moved as if choreographed. None met his gaze. Then the sky darkened, and overhead a shadow passed. Not a ship, not a fleet, a presence, and with it came a soundless scream that tore through the simulation like paper. People around him dropped to their knees, hands on their heads, as if something had peeled their thoughts away. It was the Ma. Not in physical form, but in essence. An echo of the real threat, a test. Rel turned and saw his reflection in a shattered storefront window. He was dressed in a uniform he didn't recognize, command stripes across the shoulder, medals he'd never earned. A warning bloomed in his mind. This is the path of power without purpose. Your first test. Echanine's voice echoed from nowhere his choice. Save the colony or save the ship. Suddenly the scene shifted again. Now he stood on the bridge of a smaller vessel, watching a human colony world burn beneath him. Civilians, children, no escape. But above them, a Threxian warship loomed, massive, damaged, and primed to detonate. The only way to prevent the colony's destruction was to divert all Seraphim energy to shielding the planet, but doing so would drain the Seraphim, rendering it vulnerable. The alien coalition, still suspicious of humanity, had ships nearby. If the Seraphim lost power now, it could be taken or destroyed. He had to choose: save the people and lose the Seraphim, or save the ship and abandon 10,000 innocents. His hand hovered over the console. He chose the people. The simulation shattered, like ice underfoot. He fell. Next came silence, then fire. A war zone unfolded. Not a battle between species, but between principles. Two armies of humans, each claiming to be the rightful inheritors of the Seraphim's power. Clashed in a desert scorched by orbital burns, Rel walked among the bodies. All wore his face, slightly different, older, younger, scarred. Clean but all him. One version approached, half-burned, dragging a plasma rifle. "You gave them a weapon," the doppelganger snarled. "You gave yourself a god's throne." Another figure appeared, this one cloaked in Xarnak robes, its face human, its voice quiet. "You gave them hope," it said, "and they turned it into ambition." Echanine returned once more, as the battlefield faded into mist. Inheritance is not about deserving, it said. It is about understanding the burden of being chosen. The seraphim holds knowledge that can terraform worlds, heal plagues, pierce dimensional folds, and unravel civilizations. Rel stood silent, his fists clenched. I don't want to. Rule, he said finally. We know, Echo 9 replied. That is why the seraphim chose you. Light gathered around him, not bright and violent, but warm and golden-like, the glow of sunrise through stained glass. The fractured simulations folded into the blackness, and the platform beneath his feet reassembled. He was back in the real bridge, or perhaps it was the final layer of the simulation. It no longer mattered. In front of him now stood a pedestal, and on it a single crystal shard humming softly. The Codex of Inheritance, Echinine said. The memory, intent, and keys to the seraphim. Take it, and the ship will answer only to your voice. Refuse it, and we will seal ourselves again until another voice comes, perhaps centuries from now. Rel stared at the shard. He thought of Earth, of the broken politics, the fragile alliances. He thought of the humans who would see this as a gift on those who would see it as leverage. Then he thought of the maw, of the silence, of the Xarnak's final cries etched into the spires of memory. He stepped forward, and he took the codex. The seraphim responded instantly. The ship pulsed. With new life, star maps unfolded in the air, showing corridors of space unknown to any existing chart. Technologies locked away behind recursive encryption suddenly became accessible. Systems long dormant awakened with purpose. A tremor passed through the whole knot. Danger, but resonance. The seraphim was no longer waiting. It had chosen. The trial of inheritance was over, and humanity had passed. But as the lights dimmed and the chamber quieted, Kanine offered one final message. The maw has begun to stir. Rel nodded. Then he turned toward the command interface, because the real trial was just beginning. Asterisk. The seraphim moved, not like a ship firing thrusters or entering slipstream. It moved as if space itself gave way to it, curving gently around its form, bending like silk. One moment it hovered above the fringe of Sector Delta 92, silent and patient. The next, it reappeared at the edge of human-colonized space. Broadcasting a single signal in all known languages, the maw is returning. The inheritor has awakened. Unity is required. Across the galaxy, the message ignited chaos. For some, it was a prophecy fulfilled. For others, a declaration of war. The Threxians scrambled their fleets, fearing humanity now held a weapon beyond understanding. The Nalari fell into silence, their psychics shaken by images they could not unsee, visions of stars dimming and voices vanishing mid-thought. And on a remote council moon, the Valari convened their circle of memory for the first time in centuries, dusting off ancient records written not on data slates but into living crystals, fragments of warnings whispered by the Xarnak. Long before their fall, the consensus was clear. Something was coming, and only the seraphim could face it. Inside the ship, Rel stood on the bridge knot as a conqueror, not even as a captain, but as the chosen voice of a civilization long gone. He no longer saw Echinine as just an AI. It had become something closer to a guide, a steward of memory. Together, they began preparing the seraphim not to attack, but to warn, to reach out across the stars and unify. The Codex allowed Rel to access the ship's deeper systems. There were archives in languages he couldn't pronounce, technology that seemed to respond more to thought than command. He could walk into a room and watch it change around him, shaping itself to fit his intentions. But for all its wonder, the seraphim was not limitless. There were still parts of it even Echinine feared to awaken. Systems that had not been touched. Since the Maw's first arrival, weapon cores that operated on logic loops, written by minds far beyond his own. Defense grids capable of unmaking gravity itself. Rel chose not to activate them, not yet. Instead, he sent out the calling a new signal. Built from fragments of the Xarnak's warnings and echoes of the Maw's early incursions, it didn't threaten, it invited to the humans. He offered technology, not weapons, but healing systems, environmental preneurs, archives of lost biological knowledge to the other species. He offered access not to the Seraphim's command, but to its records. He promised transparency, cooperation, a place in what came next. Some accepted, others refused, and a few began to plan in secret. It was on the edge of the Sagrail expanse where the first true sign of the Maw reappeared. The Villari listening post went dark. Then a trade convoy vanished without a distress signal. Gravity waves pulsed from the sector's center oscillations, with no source, no mass, no meaning. But the readings matched one thing in the Seraphim's archive: null wave dispersal, the Maw's signature. Rel gathered what he could. It's not just warships, but thinkers, engineers, diplomats. He sent messages to the Threxians, offering alliance. To the Nolari, he gave access to Econine for a single shared memory link a trust no species had ever received from the Xarnak. Slowly, reluctantly, the galaxy began to listen. The Seraphim had no fleet, but it had truth, and truth, when shared, can be more dangerous than any weapon. But not all hearts were turned. An alliance of splinter powers, bitter from their exclusion, afraid of humanity's rising, status launched an assault. Their target, the Seraphim's central core. Their goal, shut down Econine, steal the Codex, control the ship. They came in silence, cloaked, wielding null shard torpedoes designed to disable sentient systems. Rel knew they were coming. He'd seen it in the data, in their movements. In the betrayal written in the silence of their transmissions, he didn't activate the ship's defenses. Instead, sent them a message. You can fire. You might even breach the hull. But this ship will not respond with violence unless it must. And if it must, it will not stop. They did not fire. The ships peeled away one by one, because somewhere deep in their ancient memories, they too remembered the Xarnak, and they feared what still lay dormant in the Seraphim's heart. The Maw came slowly, not as a fleet, not as monsters, but as absence. Regions of space where logic failed, where thoughts echoed too long in the mind, where AI went quiet and stars dimmed unnaturally, where explorers reported feeling unseen. Rel stood on the bridge, codex humming in his palm. Econine showed him the simulations, the many ways the Maw could arrive. None of them made sense. Because the Maw didn't destroy systems, it unwound them. It whispered silence into the equations of life. And so, Rel did the only thing he believed the Xarnak never dared. He broadcasted again. Not warnings, not threats, but a message into the dark. We are still here. We remember. We choose life. And then he waited. The Seraphim stood like a beacon at the edge of night, its lights casting patterns into the void mathematical poetry. Written across space, signals of intent, resilience. Defiance. Maybe the Maw would come. Maybe it would try to erase them. But this time, the galaxy would not face it alone. Because one voice had awakened an ancient mind, and that voice was human.